Good morning. I'm Sue Ostoff with the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women, and I'm from Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, we would never start a conference at 8 a.m. So that's one thing. And then my plane was 4 hours late last night, so I got in at 12:30 your time, which was 2:30 my time. So I'm in really fine shape and very pleased about the starting time of this conference. Anyway, it is with great pleasure that I am back in Montana for the second time in my life. And I was coming in here last night, and we had this 4-hour wait in Minneapolis, and I met this guy from Montana who was about 6'4", with a hat that was about this big. And he asked me what I did. And I told him, I work with battered women who kill their husbands. And he said, wow. And I said, yeah, wow. He said, they should do that. And I said, well, we could talk about this, and we will talk about this more. And he said, no one should ever hit a woman. And I thought, wow, there's a man who's clear, very clear. And so I thought, it's interesting to be coming to Montana, where when I was here last year, I met some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. You have a lot of nice people here. And so it's also really interesting to be here talking about violence, because there's a lot of people who continue to use violence in Montana. But back to the niceness, I have never gone to any conference where I got a box of Huckleberry candy for coming to present, so thank you very much. It's with great pleasure that I get to introduce the next speaker, Lisa Grimshaw. I knew of Lisa Grimshaw long before I had the opportunity to get to meet Lisa and to work with Lisa. At the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women, we assist attorneys and others who are working to provide a vigorous and excellent legal defense for battered women who are charged with crimes. And Lisa's defense team contacted our office many years ago. And Lisa was, in fact, the first woman who successfully introduced expert testimony about the history of violence at her trial in the state of Massachusetts. In what year? 89. In 1989. And unfortunately, after the trial, the jury did come back with a conviction. And Lisa, I don't think you even know this. Your attorney called our office and said, we need to do some work on sentencing, and we need to do this fast. So I and another coworker spent about 8 hours one day going through every single piece of information that we had in our office, trying to figure out ways of convincing Lisa's judge to give her a much lower sentence than the prosecutor was asking for, and to convince this judge that, in fact, other women across the country had, in fact, received a smaller sentence than was being asked for. So I've had a lot of experience with Lisa's case. But what we do at the National Clearinghouse is always remember that behind each of those cases is a woman with a real life. And Lisa is a real woman with a real life. Lisa currently is employed by the Massachusetts Criminal Justice Training Council as a domestic violence specialist, and is on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Coalition for Battered Women's Service Groups. Some of you may have seen the movie Defending Our Lives. Lisa is featured in that, and was also recently on TV in the Turning Point show about the Framingham 8, about the women who are battered women incarcerated at the state correctional facility at Framingham, Massachusetts. While she was incarcerated at the institution, Lisa displayed her leadership skills there, and along with other women, did tremendous organizing, and really started getting this issue of incarcerated battered women out into the streets, and started making people in Massachusetts and frankly across the country start paying much more attention to the issue that our prisons are filled with women who are survivors of violence. She's facilitated support groups there. She helped develop a resource library, and as I said, did just fabulous organizing from within the prison walls of getting people on the outside to pay attention to this very serious issue. Just 4 days ago, Lisa learned that she is the recipient of the Rika Rose Award, which is, Rika is a kind of sneaker, and Rose stands for regaining our self-esteem. And they give it to outstanding activists who are working to end violence in the lives of women and children. And Lisa certainly is one of the most deserving recipients of this award that I can think of. I had the great pleasure of meeting Lisa in May. The National Clearinghouse pulled together a bunch of thinkers from across the country to help us do planning about the type of work that we as an organization and we as activists should be doing to support battered women charged with crimes. So Lisa came down to Philadelphia and spent 3 days with us helping to do this planning and this thinking. And it was like meeting an old friend when we finally got to see each other and to talk with each other and be together. You guys are very lucky to have Lisa Grimshaw come speak to you today. Thank you.
Good morning. I just want to pass them these out. As Sue said, I'm devoted to this work now, and for many reasons, as you heard of why. I first started doing this work from prison. And I think most of all, I just wanted my story to be heard so that it wouldn't have to happen to other women. And if I was to end up in prison in the beginning of that telling my story, then that's what should have been. And I did go to prison. I spent 8.5 years in prison. I was released December 23rd of last year. Right now, through the Training Council in Massachusetts, I'm training police officers for when they go to a domestic violence call and how important it is to react to that domestic violence call, to the women, to the male partner, if it is a male partner, and to the children also. Also, I'm developing a curriculum that goes into high schools for teen dating violence. This curriculum we want to use as a police officer also to go into the high schools with an advocate or a professional person from the school so that they can team up together and pair up together, because it will affect boys and girls of teenage years. And we found, using one curriculum which we already have developed in Massachusetts, that it does work. The domestic violence and violent relationships in one high school in Framingham, Massachusetts, has went down almost 55% of having an officer in the school using this curriculum along with an advocate or professional from the school. So as working for the Training Council, we are developing a whole new curriculum to do that in the state of Massachusetts, which will basically be 45-minute sessions in 3 sessions for 3 days, and teaching the children about respect and the different types of abuse that is out there, to have them recognize it for what it is. I've spent, as I said, 8.5 years in prison, but there's a little bit of history to that. I come from a very violent home, very abusive parent, father, sexual and physical. I ended up in foster homes because of that, acting out, quote unquote, nobody looking at the core of the problem of what happened to me as a child. In foster homes, I was sexually abused. Then I ended up with a man who was going to save me from all that, because I didn't deserve that. I went out with him for about 4 years. I got pregnant at the age of 13 years old. My first child was born with a lot of deformities. I was thrown down the stairs, kicked in the stomach. And the hospital told me that they weren't sure of how this happened to me. But there was no proof of drugs. They checked into my history of drugs. They tested me for drugs. They tested me also for my mother taking a certain drug when she was pregnant for me to see if that would form the birth defects of my son that was born. All of that was negative. That wasn't the problem. But I can remember being thrown down the stairs and kicked in the stomach during my pregnancy. I was also very young. Then I met my husband, whose name was Tommy. I was with him for 5 years. And he witnessed Daryl abusing me in a parking lot one day, dragging me across the parking lot by my hair and kicking me in the back. Who also came up to me later on and said I didn't deserve that. I shouldn't be treated that way. And so I kept on believing these people that would tell me this, and I would go to these people thinking that, okay, this person will treat me better. None of that was true. So I ended up with Tommy for 5 years. During the course of those 5 years, there was a lot of physical abuse, a lot of emotional abuse, and a lot of sexual abuse. At that point in my life, I think I had no self-esteem left, or if I had any at all, it was basically gone. I had no self-worth. So whatever people did to me at that point in my life, and I'll speak for my husband at this time, I felt I deserved it in some way, because I did something wrong. Supper wasn't ready. I looked a certain way. I shouldn't have looked that way. I wore certain clothes I shouldn't have wore. I wore too much makeup. I didn't wear enough makeup. I was too fat. I was too skinny. I didn't have big enough breasts. I mean, there was always something wrong that I had to work on, and walking on eggshells, never knowing what was going to happen next to me. But then I ended up getting pregnant with my son Chad, who is now 13. My son Chad was born very healthy, thank God. During the course of that pregnancy, there was a knife held to my stomach, and he was going to cut the baby out of my stomach. And I believe this man, because this man showed me he would do these things to me time and time again without any hesitation. And if you live a life of abuse as I have led, in my case, it ended up in an extreme ending, which shouldn't have to happen. I ended up, I'll give you a couple more instances of abuse if you don't see the film this afternoon. I called the police on numerous occasions back in 1985. And during this time, there was no mandatory arrest. There was restraining orders out there, and I went to the courts and filed and called the police and begged them to at least patrol my house. Please patrol my house. I know he's going to come back. And they actually got to a point where they knew who I was when I called, but they didn't come to my house anymore. There was one incident where I did call the police, and they didn't come, and he was trying to break through the door at the time. And it was in the midst of summer, and I was hammering the windows closed with these probably 3-inch nails so that he couldn't get into the window, the front door. While I was hammering that windows closed, he busted through the door. I remember being so afraid, and I ran. But while I ran, I put the hammer on the table in the kitchen, and he came after me with the hammer. He ended up knocking most of my front teeth out with this hammer. And I tried to protect my face and went into the corner of the room and was hit repeatedly in the back. There was blood everywhere. The police did finally come because the neighbors called them and told them something's happening, you better get over here. So when the police arrived, they took pictures, they took statements. His friend had intervened into that fight at that time. He was in the parking lot and he overheard it. I was lucky. I think I probably wouldn't be standing here today. Tommy was not charged with any charges. You know, he broke through the house. That's breaking and entering in the daytime. Assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, which was the hammer. Attempted murder on me, there was already previous records of this happening through restraining orders which I had issued, which he had broken, and I had broken myself also. I was threatened if I was to pursue to go to court on this conviction of my husband. And of course, I didn't pursue it. I didn't go. Because he said he was going to kill me. And I believed him. As you see, he showed me in different ways what he could do to me. So of course I believed him. I met these two men, once again, who saw Tommy abuse me in a parking lot. So they were going to protect me this time. I was working, and my husband walked in, and he took a knife to my leather coat and told me that was going to be my face. And they witnessed that. They witnessed him out in the parking lot, slicing my tires, breaking my windshield, pulling my core wire out of my car, all of those things that happen weekly with me. They witnessed this, so they ended up asking me if they wanted them to beat him up. And there was a phone call made one morning in my apartment. I remember I was in my bathrobe. And the guys had just come over to my house, and they said, "Are you okay today?" They did checkups on me to see how I was. And while they were in the apartment, my husband called me and told me that he had been in the house the night before, and I said, there is no possible way you could have been in my house. And the reason why is because I had my locks changed, all of the above that I did, and had proof of all this, that I did this through a locksmith. I was on welfare. It was very hard to manage that. He told me that he had watched me while I slept. I said, Tommy, you couldn't have done that. He said, look down, you got blue polka dot underwear on. And I did have blue polka dot underwear on. So that was his mental torture toward me, just to let me know that he could get me at any point in time in my life. The last incident of abuse before Tommy's death was right, it was down at a boat ramp. But prior to that day, 2 days prior, he was at my house, probably 16 hours out of a 24-hour day trying to break in the door. As I called the police, they wouldn't come anymore. I ended up, these guys ended up showing at my house, coming to my apartment and saying to me, well, let's go beat him up. And, you know, I don't know what I was thinking at that time. All I know is I wanted the violence to stop in my life. It was a wrong decision on my part. But then again, I might not be standing here talking to you. And I would be just another statistic in the state of Massachusetts. I drove Tommy down to a boat ramp, and these two men beat him up. And when I went to trial, I told them that all I wanted him to feel is what I felt. And in the process of this beating, Tommy died. I went to prison for 18 to 20 years for that. But the first 3.5 years of that imprisonment was in a unit called ATU, Awaiting Trial Unit. This is the unit that I awaited trial for 3.5 years in a 8x15 room, locked up 22 hours a day in this room for 3.5 years. Before I went to trial, before I was guilty of a crime. Finally, I went to trial in 1989, and as Sue Osthoff said to you, I was the first woman to use this battered woman syndrome in the state of Massachusetts. I think in the state of Massachusetts, being the first woman that I was an example of, a lot of my evidence wasn't admissible in court because the jury was sent out of the room during the time when a lot of stuff was introduced. Also, Dr. Lenore Walker was my psychologist during this time. And she's a great psychologist of domestic violence and a great instructor to instruct a jury. But also, the state was so new to it, and they didn't really understand it. They tried to say that I hired these two men to kill my husband. There was insurance money involved. The media said all that. The police and the DA went after that. And that's fine. Everybody did their job. That was their job to do that at that time. My job was to tell my side of the story, what happened to me. And that's all I wanted. And at that time, the death penalty was sitting on the desk of the governor. So my lawyer didn't want me to plead guilty and to take a lower sentence, but she was also afraid for me. I said, no, we have to go on. But there's a slight little story in between there. I was out on bail for 6 months after 3.5 years of incarceration in that unit called ATU. And when I was out on bail for those 6 months, I went to trial from the street, which means I went to trial every day from an apartment which I was living in to get a sentence of 18 to 20 years. And a woman in that courtroom put her house up for me to get out on bail. And that woman in that courtroom, I did not know her name. I didn't even know her. And she told me 2 months later to flee the country. And don't go back to prison, Lisa. I don't care about my house. If it can save you from prison, then I want you to flee the country. And I decided not to do that because I still had to have my side of the story heard. And if I went to prison, then that's what was going to happen. And I did. I went back for 6 more years. And that's why I'm here today. I'd like to read you something about a response to women fighting back in the 18th centuries. By the beginning of the 18th century, a woman had fought for and achieved a number of legal and moral spiritual rights. Russian women rose up in desperation against such treatment as stated above. They went on a rampage, murdering their husbands in revenge. Although there was no law against wife killing, a law was established to prohibit husband killing. As a punishment to these women were buried alive, standing upright with only their heads left above the earth until they died. John Perry, an English engineer who lived in Russia, said, "It was a common sight I have known to walk by and see these women sit in this earth for 7 to 8 days with their heads above the earth." Even today, still today, this is still going on in certain countries about women who fight back. I'm not saying the answer is violence, because the answer is not violence. But the answer is intervention before it has to get to that point. And that's what you have to realize. I'm an extreme case of what can happen to somebody. And it was my husband who died in this case. But I would not be here either. Believe me, or my son would not be alive. And I left him when he was 3 and went to prison. He's 13 years old now. I don't know him. We're trying to regain our life together again. Even so today, in the Central Orthodox Jewish prayer for a man is on thanking God for not have been born a woman. 2 to 4 million women a year in the U.S. are beaten. In the United States, in 1993, a wife cannot prosecute her husband for marital rape. It's still in 27 states. Denial of reproductive rights keep a woman dependent. In Sri Lanka, Syria, and Philippines, women are detained, tortured, or killed for being related to someone in the government considers undesirable. In Latin America, a woman who bore children in prison was executed and the children were given away. This is happening today. In Saudi Arabia, 6 female university professors were fired for driving their cars. It's illegal for a woman to drive. In China, the murder of female children often occurs in rural areas. Any woman who tries to organize unions in that country are raped and tortured. In Asia and Latin America, poor women who have no means of survival are paid a few $100s to use their wombs to have the rich people's children. 100 women have been battered in this country and at least 10 raped during the time of my talk. Violence against women is not about isolated incidents, although we hold and need to hold every man accountable who batter women. Instead, it becomes a history of oppression and violence. I'm going to go to some overheads. Where's this projector? Okay. Here's just some danger signs for a partner abuse that I'd like to go over with you. A partner is overly possessive and extremely jealous and may accuse you of flirting, call to check on you often, and insist on knowing where your whereabouts are at all times. This also goes for teenagers in dating relationships. Can you see this over here? I do go out and speak in the schools, and what I find is the same thing applies to women as it does to adolescent girls. They think the gestures are really cute. They think that their boyfriend really loves them and cares about them because they are jealous of them, because they tell them what to wear and what not to wear, because they tell them who to talk to and who not to talk to. And those are the first signs of controlling behavior of their partner who will be abusive toward them. Partner seems to lack own interest and is overly dependent on the relationship. That happens a lot in teenage relationships and adult relationships. The boy will say to the girl, well, why don't you go out with me tonight instead of going out with your girlfriends? You know I want to be with you. So that statement alone makes her feel like, well, okay, that's where the alienation comes in, isolation of friends and family. Without you even knowing that it's happened to you, it's already happened. Partner discourages your own outside interests and friendships and attempts to isolate you from family and friends. A partner is overly critical, finding fault with the way you dress and your talents and your conduct. And also, that also goes with adult women. If a woman is independent and is on her own and has a good job, that actually sometimes threatens a batterer, and the batterer will want to diminish that to happen. In certain ways, he will try to do it and chip away at her self-esteem, which would make her feel like she cannot do that and achieve that goal. Partner has poor communication skills and unable to settle differences with words. That's basically what that ends up, is to settle differences with controlling factors and violence. Partner abuses and increases with the use of alcohol and drugs. Alcohol and drugs, there's sometimes a myth that people talk about that it causes abuse, and it causes women to be beaten, children to be beaten, and to have violence in their lives. This is not true at all, because I have talked to people and women and advocates and done trainings and worked with women one-on-one that, yes, sometimes there is alcohol involved and drugs, and all that does is isolate the incident and make it worse. But the incident will happen, and it has happened, without the drugs and alcohol. A partner tries to sabotage your work and school efforts, possibly forcing you, convincing you to quit against your own wishes. Partner tries to control the money and decisions. These are all controlling factors and danger signs of a relationship that basically will tell you that you're going to end up in a battering relationship if these are part of your life. But some of these incidences happen without you even knowing that they're happening to you, because they happen so slowly. And it's a very chipped away process that happens. Could happen over 6 months, could happen over 3, could happen over 5 years. But if this happens, then you end up in a relationship that you don't want to be in. And then it seems like harder to get out of it. These are 5 things I say to a victim, and it's pretty simple. And also, the police also did this now in Massachusetts. Very simple thing. But I can tell you, if I heard these 5 things when I was going through it, it might have made a difference to me. No one told me I didn't deserve to be abused. No one told me that simple thing, that I didn't deserve this. Especially a police officer didn't tell me that at that time. I am here for you when you are ready to leave. Now, I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of advocates, police officers also, when I do trainings. They say, Lisa, you know, it gets a little tired when we go back to the house 3 or 4 times and the woman doesn't want to leave. I said, I relate to that. I understand that. I know this happens. It's human nature to start to lessen the seriousness of it. But I also tell these police officers it's their job to protect the woman, not to judge her. And I understand how you can lose focus on that, because you can, because going back, that's what I mean, 5 or 6 times to the same house on the same thing, you're thinking, she's just not understanding this issue. And maybe in some ways she's not, but she might be hearing one thing that you're saying the first time. The second time, she might be hearing 3 things that you're saying. And maybe by that 5th time, she might be ready. But she also can assess her own danger level, as I could assess mine. I knew when I was in more danger than I was when other times. I'm afraid for the safety of your children. That's almost a 50-50. I have women who haven't protected their children because they were so afraid of their batterer, and I have women who act out dangerously when the batterer protects their children. So that all depends on the woman. That statistic goes back and forth. I would say it's 50-50. And that doesn't make the woman any less than, believe me. My mother didn't protect me, but I protected my son. So I look at that, and I've also talked to women. There was one client I talked to for about a year in prison. I had certain women come to me for counseling in prison. She was so ashamed, and she should be to a certain degree. She allowed her husband to sexually abuse her kids. And I know you say, oh my God. And you're right. But she was so afraid of this man that she just didn't want to step in. And she pretended it wasn't happening. She just pretended it wasn't happening. And in some godforsaken way, she was glad it wasn't her. Now, that woman went through a lot of razz in prison, and she got beaten up a lot. But it comes down to the same thing. She was an abused woman. She was a battered woman. She was brutally, sexually abused by this man, and tortured and raped. I'm sure most of you, and also Casey was saying yesterday, that a safety planning with a victim is very, very important. And if they're not ready for the safety plan, then you can set it in place, and when they are ready, they're going to have it available for them. What I tell women is when you're ready. But to have a safety plan in place, they feel a little more secure, that they have the keys hidden somewhere else, they have all the school records to the children hidden somewhere else. They have time to get copies of things. This is something that I think should be used in all areas, human services, police, and that we know it's being used in the shelters also now. But it's not only there, it should also be used in hospitals, emergency rooms. I'm going to go into the curriculum that I will be using and that I do use. A woman in the U.S. is more likely to be killed by her partner than any other assailant. There's a health department study done by Wayne University. This is pretty amazing to me. 1 out of 4 murdered victims was a woman and is a woman. 9 out of 10 women are murdered by their husbands. 4 out of 5 are murdered at home. Almost 3 out of 4 are murdered by husbands and lovers. Almost none are killed by strangers. "75% of women who have been sexually raped by their husband killed their batterer." 75%. I think I go back to using my case when I speak. I talk about documentation. Because I think if documentation was in place when I was going to social service agencies, when I was going to welfare and they saw the hair missing and the teeth missing and the bruises on my face and black eyes, they might have asked me a couple questions of what was wrong with me. But nobody asked that question. Documentation, police reports, and pictures are very, very important. And I mean that in any service of you work in the community, in society. If you're dealing with a woman who is being abused and you're not documenting it, then you're just as much as fault as her not reporting it. Because what if it comes down to documentation have to be used? I can give you for instance about this. At my trial lasted 2.5 weeks long. The DA said that it was an apple that caused my teeth to be missing in the front of my mouth. Or it could have been an apple, that's what they were trying to say. I had to get a dentist on the stand to verify that it was a blunt blow to my mouth that caused this. But some years later, 9 years later, I've been to the chiropractor just about a month ago. I've been having back pain for years and neck pain, not thinking anything of it because I dealt with pain most of my life, so I'm pretty used to it, as most battered women do that. I found out my chiropractor showed me x-rays, 3 x-rays. She said to me, "You've been in a traumatic car accident." I said, no, I haven't. She showed me x-rays of a person who was a normal neck, which basically has a certain curve to it. And she also showed me x-rays of a person who was in a severe car accident, which was pretty messed up. And then she showed me my x-rays. And there's the proof right there of my life and my neck and back. I have discs that are unrepairable. I have lacerations, vertebrae that are out of place, irreversible damage that can never be fixed. She told me in maybe 10 years from now, I'd be lucky if I was walking, if I didn't go to this chiropractor now today. But just think about that documentation that could have helped me in my case. Just pictures, proof, x-rays, simple little things that we don't think about. I went and got my teeth fixed when I got out of prison. Once again, the woman said to me, boy, the front of your gums is really, and I saw it. I saw it once again. It's just smashed. Smashed. I said, she said, you've had a blunt blow to the top of your mouth more than once. Yes, I have. You know, it was like all of this validation happened to me over in the course of 4 weeks' time after serving 8.5 years in prison. It was amazing to me. But that's my story about documentation. You just never know when you might have to use it and how important it really is. At my trial, there was a woman, my counselor when I was a child, 15 years. 15 years I haven't seen this person. Her name was Mim. And I was in foster care, and she was my counselor when I was going through the foster home routine. Well, she showed up at my governor's council in front of the parole board to admit to these people that she saw me with that hair missing in bald spots and black eyes and broken noses to where both my eyes were blackened. She saw me like this, and she didn't report it. She did not report it. And she had to tell me she was sorry, 15 years later. And I accepted that apology. I accepted that. But to see her in front of these people and admit that, that meant a lot to me. But I know that woman will never do that again. I know that. So documentation is very important. Teen dating violence into schools is something that we have to start with, because as I've been talking about adult victims of violence, where do we learn this? It's a learned behavior. I wasn't born to be battered, okay? My husband wasn't born to batter me. It was a learned behavior. Where did they learn this? Where did I learn this? From my peers, from society, from my parents. Because I thought that was the way to be treated. And I thought that was the way I deserved to be treated. And my husband, the same thing. I broke that cycle now. I broke it in the wrong way. I broke it because there was a death involved. And my point, once again, should not have to come to that. But teaching children and teaching students about just this personal and different effects of violence in their lives. We're talking just the controlling gestures of relationships, the basic stuff, the danger signs, the jealousies. Those are all first signs of what a controlling relationship will start to be like. And teaching these kids into schools about respect and the different forms of violence. And the different forms of violence, you have sexual abuse, you have verbal abuse, you have psychological abuse, you have physical abuse, emotional abuse. There's all types of abuse out there. And a lot of women I talk to, and students, and kids, tell me that it's not physical, he doesn't hit me, so I'm not being abused. That's not true. That's not true. Because psychologically, if you're in this type of relationships, when I put that danger sign up there with the students, they're like, wow, well, yeah, he kind of does this, and he kind of does that. I'm like, okay, you know, and then I start to talk. Kids will talk to you where adults are afraid to. Kids will talk. As long as you open a doorway, they're going to talk to you. Because kids have this, it's not that they're not afraid, they are afraid. But they're not as ashamed as adults are. Because adults haven't talked about it most of their life. Where kids, if they talk about it at an early age, it becomes an easier way to talk about it as an adult. And I don't know if you understand that or not, but it's my concept anyways. But going into the schools and doing this is very important, and it's very important to me. Over 60% reported rapes are date rapes, or just acquaintance rapes. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 8 boys will experience a form of sexual assault before their 18th birthday. 47 of these children will know the person who assaulted them. 21% of these assailants will live in the same household as that child. Of boys aged 11 to 20 years old who commit homicide, 63% killed a man who was abusing their mother. Now, sending that boy to prison, what's going to happen to him? Maybe raped, learn more violent behavior, learn how to act out more violently. Out of 1,000 restraining orders issued in 1991 to 1993, the ages were 13 to 19 years old, males. And 1 out of 4 teens are in violent relationships. And that's not assuming, and we can't assume that when we go into the schools that they're already dating, because sometimes they're not. So we have to make sure we talk about that too. Because sometimes they're not dating yet, but we just want to prepare them if they do start to. One thing that is most important before you go into a school and talk to children, you always have to remember there's going to be a fallout. And what I mean by that, by a fallout, is that you have to have things set up in place for this. You have to have guidance counselors ready, social workers ready, and the mandating reporting that's going to happen is unbelievable. Because once these students start hearing about what could happen to them, what violence means, and what domestic violence means, and what teen dating violence means, and what these different forms of abuse mean to these kids, they're going to come to you and say, this is happening at home. It's happening to me now. My mother's doing it. My father's doing it. And where does that leave you? As a mandated reporter, you have to report it. But where does that leave that child with all this stuff that's inside their head, not knowing what's happening to them or why? They have to talk to somebody about this. Because that's where you break the cycle of violence. That person won't grow up to be a person who's battered or a person who will batter. That's where you have to stop it. But what's important about that is to make sure you have the fallout set up, whatever it may be in your school system or whatever human agency that you work for, to have this set up to either psychologists, psychiatrists, guidance counselors, social workers. Anybody can go through training to help children realize what's happening to them. It's one thing just to report it, but that child needs care after this, and to understand why it's happening to them, and to know one thing, that it's not their fault. Because if a child thinks it's their fault, they will grow up to be an adult thinking the same thing, and either do the same thing or have the same thing done to them. When you go into a school, the program that we want to, let me skip that. Don't have time. Don't have time. Don't have time. Okay. We develop different lists, and we put up lists on the board of the different forms of abuse, and we give lists of what that means, what those abuses mean. But we do a brainstorming list on respect. What do children consider respect? And here's some of the questions. These are very important questions you ask the kids. What do you consider respect around physical touch? That's a hard one. That's a very hard one for kids to answer. What do you consider respect around sex? And what do you like, how do you like someone to talk to you? How do you like someone to resolve conflict with you? Kids usually can't answer that one because they don't know. You know, there's bullying in school, there's sexual harassment in schools, girls are being, bra straps, but depending what age group, but, dresses could be lifted up, bra straps could be pulled boys could be doing different gestures, all this stuff of sexual harassment, and the kids don't know what's happening. They don't know what all this means. And, you know, they've learned this somewhere. Where? Society, peers. That would be the first day of the curriculum. You go into the different types of abuse, and you go into the respect issues. And that takes a long time. It takes a 45-minute session to really get into detail about that. And session 2 basically would be, you put up a list on the board of what is a real man, and you get the boys involved with this. And usually the police officer would take this end because the boys feel like they can talk to him. What do you consider a real man? Facilitators question. How does a real man resolve conflict? Sample of a student responding to that. With force, by fighting. Facilitator question. What kind of work does he do? Construction businessman. What type of car does he drive? BMW, Porsche. Sports car. What is a real man's relationship with a woman? Stud, ladies' man, in control. These are actually students' responses. How does he feel about himself? Oh, he likes himself very much. When is it okay for a real man to cry? Only when someone dies. How does a real man walk? He struts across the room. What sports does a real man like? Contact sports. We have a ladylike list now of the girls. Facilitate a question. How does a lady dress? Skirts, dresses, students answer. How does a lady resolve conflict? She cries and she gives in. What does she do for work? Housewife and secretary. What colors does she like? Soft and pink colors. How does a lady sit? Legs crossed, knees together. How is she told to attract a man? Act dumb, build him up. These kids actually gave these answers to this curriculum. We go into another list. We ask about what men are and what women are. Students' responses. And what I do with that, I take ads from magazines, teen magazine, different magazines, Mademoiselle, Glamour. I look and I get sexual ads that are exploiting women, which is probably every one of them in there. But I cut them all out, basically, and I put them in Saran Wrap, and I place them on board. And I pass them out, and I also give ads of drinking, lingerie ads, and how they address women and men. Businessmen in suits, that type of thing. And I'll pass them around the classroom, and I'll get everybody talking about it. And what we get for answers, ads in which women are positioned in sexually suggestive or seductive poses. Hidden message. Women are sexually available, sluts, whore, ready for it, raped, and used. Ads in which women are drinking and consuming or wearing a product in order to attract men. Hidden message. Women are seductive, thinking about a man, waiting for a man, only caring about attracting men. Ads showing sophisticated women half-dressed, undressed in a business suit, but clearly enjoying her soft, sexy undergarments. The caption says, real woman. Is the real woman her undergarments? A hidden message. Women are sexy, provocative, but still are sex objects, even if they are successful. Get the power only through sex. Hidden message. Ads in which women are powerfully built, look confident, even masterful. Very frequently they are shown in control of a dominant position regards a woman in an ad. Hidden message, men are dominant, in control of a woman. Powerful, feel good about themselves, strong, enjoy power over women. Now these kids actually come up with some of these answers, but we have to get them going to seeing what the hidden message is, and then they start talking about, oh yeah, look at this, and look, and they really get into it. And it really starts the boys against the girls in the classroom, but that's where the facilitator's got to come in and take over because it can get a little out of hand. And that's okay because it gets them active and talking about it, you know, and that's okay. Defining stereotype, that would be another next, go into a part of that next second session. But kids don't know what stereotype means. They don't know. You have to explain and define stereotype. Defining stereotype. A stereotype is a mental picture held by a group of people that is oversimplified, unfair, distorted, and limiting view of another group of people. That's the definition of stereotype. Kids understand that. They really do. But you just have to explain it. And you go into stereotypes. Women are, men are, you put up on the board. We have a little list. We ask them, after asking that, women are what? Thin, sexy, interested in makeup, interested in looking good, glamorous, seductive, available for sex, submissive, teases, and passionate. Men are wealthy, in control, powerful, muscular, tough, drinkers, get women drunk for sex, businessmen, interested in women's looks, and responsible. Now, what is this telling you about kids and how they think? That's our next generation growing up into adulthood. That's why you have to get to the schools. You have to make them understand what's happening out there in the real world and make them understand about different types of abuse and stereotype. In some areas, in the areas where I live, we do get into homophobia and gay and lesbian relationships because of the fact that the high rate of suicide is right up there. The third part of that, we have a batterer come in and speak, and we also have a victim of violence come in and speak to the kids. We think that's very important to get a personal story involved so they can hear about what happens. And if they can recognize situations, which they usually do, we have 29 battery treatment programs in the state of Massachusetts, which were co-founded by and founded by David Adams of Emerge. And he is actually one of the writers of this curriculum for the schools. He's very active into stopping violence against children and against adults. And he does prosecute and go after batterers because of the treatment programs. I do like to see him, as Casey was saying yesterday, about the battery treatment program that is available out in San Diego. It's over a year or a year long, if I'm correct. In the state of Massachusetts, it's not that long. And I'd like to see that change because they do need longer time in therapy. And it may not be quote-unquote therapy. It's learning their controlling behaviors and why they have those controlling behaviors. But one of the things that are interesting, that I have 2 seconds to tell you about, that he does is a lot of what David Adams, when he first goes into a battery treatment program, he makes them talk about their abusive partner by name, makes them call her name. He'll say, her, my wife, you know, but, and what was your wife's name? Lisa. It's like, almost like you go into an AA meeting and I'm here because of this. Well, they make them say their wife's name over and over and over and over again. Because you know what this does? It makes them realize she's a person. She is a person, just like he is. I have this, one more thing, I promise. This is a domestic violence campaign of the Massachusetts Medical Society. It is free. Okay, and I will give the number. The number is not toll-free, I'm sorry. But it is free. It comes with a booklet. It also comes with posters. But it can give you an idea to what you can start out here if you would like. Because they've really taken upon it as a cause, and they've done a great job. And these posters are all over Massachusetts. And there's an 800 number for the coalition that you can call. But also what is in here, it gives you a little booklet, and this booklet talks about domestic violence and everything about domestic violence. Restraining orders, safety plans, 209As, everything is explained in this book. The number is 617, area code, 893-4610. And these are free to you. All you have to do is call. Thank you very much.
Those of us who have traditionally been advocates for battered women are generally working with the police and the prosecutors in pro-arrest and pro-prosecution policies. And the work that we're going to talk about today are battered women who get charged with crimes and who are prosecuted by those very same people that are usually our allies. And I think it's been very important work for the battered women's movement to take on, working with battered women who are charged with crimes. And I am going to really focus on battered women who kill their abusers, and not as much on battered women who assault their abusers today, just because of time. I think it's been very important for the battered women's movement to really take on this issue of battered women in prison, because battered women in prison have been calling our hotlines and saying, I'm beaten up, what are you going to do for me, for years. In many, many places that has been the call, and for years we said, oh gee, I don't know. And I mean, every single study that has come out has shown that our prisons are filled with survivors of assault, either as children or as adults. And we still don't have very good statistics about what we're seeing, and not surprisingly is, as the questions are asked better and as more safety is created within the prison walls for women to actually speak the truth, we're finding out about a lot more of the abuse that's going on within prisons. I think for the battered women's movement, the fact that we have worked so hard on pro-arrest and pro-prosecution policies, and that many of us have even created, in some states and certainly in larger places, specialized units that are housed within prosecutors' offices, and special units that work very closely with the prosecution and with the police, that I think sometimes in some places some of the battered women's advocates have actually very much become arms of the state. And I think for us looking at battered women who are charged with crimes, it gives us a really good opportunity for us as battered women's advocates, which is the vast majority of this room, for us to look at that question of who do we work for, right? Because what I've seen, and maybe you can speak from your experience in your county, in your community, and other people as well, is some of the calls that we've gotten at the National Clearinghouse have been from advocates who have said, a woman just got arrested and we want to help her, but our board doesn't want us to do this because we have a prosecutor on our board and they say it's going to be a conflict of interest. Or our board is anxious about us advocating on behalf of a battered woman who's charged with crime because we might lose money. Because in the community, it might seem that we're condoning violence, that we're advocating for, women to go and kill men. And we've also had district attorneys' offices, prosecutors' offices, literally say to the Battered Women's Program, you can't work on both sides of the fence. So I think for battered women's programs, the challenge that has been presented to us by working with battered women who are charged with crimes is to really spend some time looking at who has built that fence and who gets to define that fence. Because, right? So if they're saying you can't work on both sides of the fence, you can't advocate on behalf of women who are going through the process as criminal complainants and as plaintiffs. That's what we primarily do. So that is the side of the fence we generally work on. And for a prosecutor to say, but you can't do both sides of the fence. How can you do both sides of the fence? How can you support a woman who's charged with a crime, who's being prosecuted for homicide or assault? I think the challenge for us as battered women's advocates is to say, no. That fence is a fence defined by the prosecutors. That fence is defined by the legal system. Who we work for and with is battered women, not battered women who are only complainants or plaintiffs. Now, and then I think for us, it does give us a very good opportunity to say, yeah, who do we work for? Because what I see in the battered women's movement is that we've gotten very good at starting to define quite narrowly who will advocate for and on whose behalf will advocate on. For example, I mean, many shelter programs are now saying, well, she has a drug problem, so we won't work with her. She's addicted, we won't work with her. She's hit her kids, we won't work with her. She's really angry and mean, we won't work with her. So I think what we've done is starting to put little qualifiers on about who is the good battered woman and who is not. And in many of the programs that are starting to spring up around the country, I think what we're seeing, instead of a very expansive way of thinking about the kind of work that we do, a more restrictive way. And so I think that the work that we've done with battered women who are charged with crimes has really forced people to take a hard look at that very question. Who are we working for and on whose behalf? Because we should never, in my opinion, define one's legal status as the reason we will or will not advocate for a particular woman. So saying that, I think one of the other things that's happened in the recent years is that battered women who kill is now like talked about all over the place. I started working with women who killed 10 years ago. I started working at a battered women's program in Philadelphia and was the first full-time advocate in the entire country from a battered women's program advocating on behalf of women charged with crime. Again, the vast majority of our work in the legal system, or pretty much to that point almost the exclusive work of battered women's programs in the legal system, had been on the side of the prosecution. So I had a really incredible opportunity in the Philadelphia system to get to meet women going through the system who were charged with homicide and assault. And back then, 10 years ago, I went out and I got my hands on every piece of information that I could find about battered women who were charged with crimes. And there wasn't very much. Now it's like a completely different world. There is so much information out there that on one hand, we can be excited and glad that people are talking about it. But as we all know, often a little information can be an extraordinarily dangerous thing. And what we've been seeing is, at least in my opinion, and I don't think this is just my opinion, is that just like there's been sort of this whole mythology and a huge host of myths and misconceptions about battered women, there has emerged a whole new set of myths and misconceptions about battered women who are charged with crimes. And these are very powerful myths, and that's what I want to spend some time talking about, just some of the basic points that I think we really need to counter, because what we've been seeing nationally is that there's a lot of people who want to do something. I mean, that's the good news part. Oh, women are in prison in huge, unprecedented numbers right now. Most of the women in prison are survivors of abuse. We really need to do something about this. Many are in as a direct result of domestic violence. Many are in as an indirect result of domestic violence. So we want to do something. But because people are dealing with partial truths and partially correct pieces of information, many of the legislative reforms in particular, and even some of the programmatic ideas that have come up, actually are pretty misguided. And it's been very interesting to me. I mean, it's on one hand, I feel like we've been out there in the last 10 years, and certainly in the first 5 years of the work that I was doing this, really trying to get people to take on this issue. You know, fighting, you know, we have to pay attention to this, we have to think about this. You know, our prisons are filled with women. Women are getting screwed in the legal system. There's very court systems that wouldn't pay attention to her cries for help before she ended up having to kill the guy. Suddenly find a huge amount of resources to come in and prosecute her. You know, where were they before? Why weren't they doing anything before? And so we were really out there saying people have to pay attention, and now they are. And the unfortunate thing is that we don't have the resources to really try to get people to be paying attention in the correct way, or what I believe is the correct way, or even to be asking the right questions. So it's really been an interesting challenge. I think we're in a very important historic time period on this issue. And we'll come back to that, because I think it's very important historically to note some of the things that have happened in recent years to really propel this issue into the national limelight, most notably some of the highly publicized clemency efforts that have happened around the country. And we will be reconvening at 3:15, is that right? I don't know. If I'm still awake, we will be convening.
3:15 roundtable discussion, informal discussion with Sue.
And so what we want to do is talk about what is going on here in Montana, what are some of the obstacles that battered women who are charged with crimes are facing when they do come before the court as a criminal defendant, and also to talk about clemency strategies, and what are some of the things we need to do, or should put into place, or should we be doing this at all? I mean, really try to do some of that evaluation for the state of Montana. So we'll be doing that at 3:15 and not in this group. So I'd like, any questions so far? Okay, what I'd like to do is really quickly, and since we don't have a ton of time, is go through what I see as the 8 operating myths and or stereotypes about battered women who kill. Because again, I think it's very important to both understand what I believe is the perception about this issue and what I think is the truth about this issue. I think one of the things that has certainly come out in the press in recent years is that it's now open season on men, and that there's been this massive increase in women who are killing their abusive partners, that it's just sort of gone out of control. You know, we've all heard that there's a lot more women in prison, which then we're assuming actually means there's a rise in female criminal activity. And I think we just have to ask the question, are women actually using violence more? And in some circumstances, absolutely, I do believe that young girls and women are using violence, but more than they did before. But in terms of partner homicides, what actually is interesting is that of women killing their abusive partners, the percentage is, let me try again. In partner homicides, when I started doing this work 10 years ago, the ratio was almost 50-50 of men killing women's partners and women killing men partners. I was very surprised about that when I started doing this work. The reasons men kill and the reasons women kill are dramatically different, and almost consistently across the board. Men almost never kill because they fear for their lives or their children's lives. They kill for a wide variety of reasons, which is, if you understand violence against women to really be a way of using the violence to control women, often what we're seeing is that it's the ultimate act of control by saying, if I can't have you, no one else can, when a woman is leaving. That we are seeing a lot of the separation violence and a lot of homicides happening when women leave or attempt to leave or threaten to leave. About 870 women kill their husbands or boyfriends. We do not know if they are all abusive. We can guess based on the work that we do and the experience that we all have that the vast majority of them are in fact abusive. When women kill, they almost always kill to defend themselves or their children. And now the ratio has actually shifted, and this is from the end of the 70s. From 1979 to 1984, there was actually a 25% decrease in the number of women killing their male partners, which is actually very unusual for homicide statistics for there to be such a dramatic change. The reality is, when you start looking what was happening in the late 70s, that there were a lot more options for battered women being presented by local communities. And so the reality is, women say, I didn't want him to die, I wanted the violence to end. So I think the terrifying and really, I find problematic and scary piece of this reality is that at the same time we were offering women programs and shelters and increased police response, that we were also giving women new opportunities to leave, which was also escalating the violence of men trying to maintain the women in their lives. And in fact, partner homicides of women have increased over that same period of time. The ratio is now more 1/3, 2/3, with approximately 1,600 women being killed by male partners in any given year, the vast majority of those being batterers killing women. And we still don't know how many actually have happened in separation situations. According to a recent Justice Department survey, the number of women attacked by spouses, former spouses, boyfriends, parents, or children was 10 times higher than the number of males attacked by people close to them. So women continue to be attacked at a dramatically higher rate. So it's not open season on men. It continues to be open season on women and children. The next myth that I think has, and this varies from locality to locality based on the publicity within a given community, but we hear it a lot at the clearinghouse is that, oh, now everybody's using this excuse, abuse excuse. You get up there, you go on the stand, you cry a few tears, and then you get to go home. I think there's this idea that people really are, quote, getting away with murder. Women make up this stuff, cry a few tears, and then are acquitted. The reality is that the vast majority, and from the studies that we've been able to gather and from what we've seen across the country, that it really does continue to be extraordinarily high, that between 75% and 80% of women who are charged with killing their abusers actually are convicted or take a plea. So that it's a very small percentage. And you can say, oh, well, but people who are charged with homicide, the conviction rate is in the 90s. Is that true in your community? Well, that's comparing apples and oranges. I mean, to say that it's, the conviction rate's only, it's lower. It's only, it's 80%. It's not 90% or it's 75%. And, 25% of the women actually are acquitted. That's good news, is ridiculous. It's not good news. The reality is most of these women kill to defend themselves, and the conviction rate is still that high. Something is dramatically wrong within our court systems. This is not news to you people. I think the other myth that's operating that's important is a societal myth that things are really much better for women now. We have all these new laws, there's so much more equality, that there's all these shelter programs, all these women are winning these sexual harassment lawsuits, nobody can talk to anybody anymore because women keep suing and winning, I mean, I think we have sort of this culture that has said that women have all these rights and things are really so much better, and women are safer as a result of that. I mean, you guys know, of course that's not true, but it's a very important myth that's operating here because it implies that women have so many more options that she should not, quote, have to kill the guy. She should utilize one of those other options and get out earlier so she does not have to kill the guy. The hearings like Joe Biden held in Washington when they were having hearings on the Violence Against Women Act in 1990 was talking about a massive increase of assaults of women between the ages of 20 to 24. They were saying that of women in that age bracket, assaults against them had increased 48% in the last 15 years. That's a very dramatic increase, while they actually decreased 11.8% for men. What we're also seeing, and I think this is a very important historic social context in which we do this work, is what Beth Ritchie, a longtime activist, had termed an increased criminalization of women's survival strategies. Things are really bad out there, and women try, like lots of people, try all sorts of things to survive. And for some women, that means knowing that they're going to have to forge a check to feed their kids. For some women, that means I can't take this, I can't get through a week if I don't do my drugs. I mean, we can have a conversation about whether or not those are survival strategies. I would argue that most of them are. I think women do make bad choices. I think we have to really look at how limited so many women's options are, and I think that those really need to be reviewed, and I do believe are survival strategies. And what we're seeing now is that the criminal justice system has stepped in and saying, we're going to charge you with that. We're going to arrest you for that behavior. We're going to charge you with welfare fraud. We're going to charge you with bad checks. We're going to charge you with, if you're pregnant, instead of saying, oh, you're using drugs, well, you really need help and we really need to do something like that, we're going to put you in jail. I mean, I think that we've changed from a society that's interested in trying to figure out ways of working with people to a society that's really interested in punishment, and I think women have really borne a lot of the brunt of that in recent years. And the prison statistic rates in terms of incarceration of women over the last 15 years is dramatic. The percentages are off the chart. I mean, the reality is there's still a huge number of men in prison, and so, you know, it's small increase in percentage of incarcerated males actually represents a huge number of men, because you're starting with such a large pool, so you can't actually do the comparison between men's increased incarceration rates and women's incarceration rates. But for purposes of this conversation, we note that it's gone off the charts in every single state across this country in terms of putting women in prison and charging women with a whole host of new crimes. I think it's also important to note that here we are in 1994, and as a result of O.J. Simpson, we all had many opportunities to see how the fact that that whole list of myths about battered women that we've been talking about for 25 years is still very alive and very well, is operating and, you know, quite dramatically still. That after all this time, I don't think we have done, people have been able to hear, I don't know what the right language is, I think we have not done the kind of education in a way that we need to, or that people are open enough to hear enough about battered women still. So that if it's important to note that when you're working with a battered woman who's charged with a crime, that if you have a myth or this idea that women can just leave and everything would actually be okay, and that leaving really does equal safety, that those are very important myths. Or that if she stays, that violence can't be that bad, or she likes it. You know, we all know what this whole old list of myths are, but think about how they're going to be used against women in a trial. Oh, you stayed, the violence wasn't that bad, you're making this stuff up. You know, he had beaten you up all these times before. How could you say it's going to be worse? She never died before. That's a good one. Just remember that. The only battered woman who is right is a dead one. And that's a really important piece of work when doing this. The only one who really was correct and knowing was the one who died, are the ones who died. And so if we realize that all of that mythology is going on, and now on top of all of that old mythology, we have this new backlash that's alive and well and quite substantially funded, that we have to really take on countering this quite actively right now. I mean, what I mean by this is this book, for example, by Christina Hoff Sommers, Who Stole Feminism? And this has been in the national press all over the place. She and many other people that got a lot of play after OJ have been out saying that it's all made up. There's really not that much violence against women. All these feminists have created this crisis. It's complete crap. Yes, there are a few battered women, but there's not really that many, and in fact, more men are battered than women. And I don't know, did that get any play here in Montana? This is very important, this backlash, when talking about battered women who are charged with crimes. If the new agenda is really to promote there's not that much violence, the violence isn't that bad, and when it does happen, women really do it. what does that mean for a woman who's charged with killing the guy? This is very profound backlash. It's not surprising, it's very problematic. And it is also well-funded. I mean, that's the other thing. This is not just sort of random people doing random work out there. It is being funded by very conservative foundations. It is being funded by the religious right, and it is being organized, and we need to know that. Another important myth to understand is that the myth that's out there, I believe, is that when battered women kill, they kill sleeping men or they hire someone to kill their abuser. And The Burning Bed, that movie, I think was very important in terms of bringing the issue of domestic violence into living rooms across this country. I think that movie was very important for people to understand that women could be in a circumstance where killing the guy was probably the only way she and her children would survive. I think it was very important in doing that. I also think because Francine Hughes, the woman portrayed in that movie, killed her abuser when he was asleep, that's the idea that really got portrayed out in this country, is that's how battered women kill their husbands. Also, many of the high-profile cases that have made it into the national press are of situations where battered women have killed a sleeping man or hired somebody else to kill their abuser. The reality is that in the vast majority of situations, when battered women kill, they do so during an ongoing confrontation. Almost, and based on studies that we've used and seen, and certainly based on anecdotal information, between 75 and I would say 95% of women who kill their abusers do so when they're being attacked. So, this idea that, battered women always wait, till there's a lull in violence is just not true. And many of the legislative proposals that we have seen actually are based on that assumption that women are killing when there's a lull in the violence. Some do, don't get me wrong, some do. According to a study that Professor Holly McGuigan did, who's at NYU, and she looked at appellate cases, about 75% of those cases involved confrontational situations. Now you have to realize if you're dealing with appellate cases, you already have a skewed sample, because you have cases where there was a conviction, and so then other issues continue to be addressed. So what's not in that pot are women who were acquitted. And the reality is, of those women who are acquitted, most of those women clearly killed in a confrontational situation. So
plead out.
Yeah.
Plead out, there wouldn't be a
And there wouldn't be any, that's correct. And according to Angela Brown, who wrote When Battered Women Kill, or When Battered Women Who Kill, I always forget, and certainly according to the work that we do at the National Clearinghouse, we estimate that it's about 90 to 95% of the cases where there's a confrontation at the time of the incident. And again, what that means varies a lot. It's not always the most dramatic confrontation, physical confrontation that the woman ever experienced. Often what we have seen is that there has been threats of a death prior to that, and so that she will take an action that does seem or could be deemed to be preemptive, and that's problematic legally. So that, he said the night before, you're not going to see the sun set tomorrow, and then he comes into the house and she shoots him then. It's that type of situation, but again, it is not when he is sound asleep in his bed. Although that does happen, and it poses many very complicated legal issues that we'll talk about a little bit. But I just want to underscore this because I think it's really important to get that most situations where women kill are actually very traditional self-defense situations. I think there's also this other stereotype that's operating right now that sort of has two prongs and opposed prongs. That on one hand, we sort of have this notion that battered women who kill are conniving violent criminals and who create this history of abuse and some of the stuff that we talked about before, make up this crap, really just wanted a new boyfriend or wanted the, huge amount of insurance money and didn't want to bother to get a divorce, so off the guy. There is a lot of that operating in the press. A lot of that type of conversation will come up around particular cases. We see that. This idea of women striking back, striking out, snapping out, going after the guys. And with this idea of literally trying to get away with murder because all of their girlfriends did, And then I think there's this other stereotype of sort of this mousy, quiet woman who's in the corner, and Farrah Fawcett portrayed that woman very much, who then sort of turns into a vigilante. So I think we have both of these stereotypes operating, and it's kind of this idea of, I'm going to let him have it in the sleep, when he's asleep, and then we're going to put on the special defense so I can literally get away with murder. This idea of, making some set of facts, creating some dynamic that will occur so I can get away with murder. That we see a lot of that. I also think that it's been interesting in the recent years how much the focus has been about battered women who kill their abusers. And I spoke about this earlier, is that battered women get charged with a whole host of crimes, some of which is directly related to the domestic violence, like killing their abuser or assaulting their abuser, but battered women also get charged with a wide variety of other crimes. What we do at the Clearinghouse specifically is work with battered women, in addition to those who kill and assault, with battered women who get coerced into criminal activity by their abuser. If you don't drive the getaway car, I'll kill you. If you don't turn over the welfare check, sign the welfare checks, I'll kill you. If you don't do X, Y, or Z, I'll kill you. So what they get charged with can vary dramatically depending on what it was that he said or made her do. We also work in situations, and they are very complicated situations, when women get charged with, again, it depends on the state, it depends on the jurisdiction, a wide variety of crimes that result from her so-called failure to protect her children or child. So what's the crime here? Would it be neglect, or what if the kid died?
The homicide.
It's a homicide.
Accountability to homicide.
If what we're seeing is that in some circumstances, I'll use a homicide as an example, that when the abuser kills the child and the woman, quote, did not protect the child, that she gets charged with the exact same crime as he does. Often, and we've seen this when the woman is not in the house at the time of the incident. This has happened a number of times, and gets fully prosecuted. And it's bad enough to be a bad woman in this world, but to be a bad mother is just unforgivable, and women get nailed in the court system. I don't care if you were beaten up, how could you not protect your child? And women have answers for that, by the way. Let me be clear, women have lots of answers why they were unable to protect their child. And often what we have seen is that the inability to protect the child, that one child, was often a strategy that women used to protect other children in the house. Anyway, what a horrible place to put a woman, where she makes a decision basically to let one kid go to try to save other children in the house. These are hard situations to work on. Publicly women get nailed. They're very complicated. Women are not liked in these situations. What happened after Joel Steinberg got arrested in New York, I think, was very indicative of people's attitudes. This is talking about Hedda Nussbaum, and attitudes people had about her, for example, about her failure to protect her child. She ultimately was not charged, but usually in our experience, women are charged. We have seen women get higher sentences than men. And a number of states where women had nothing to do with the physical violence, and like I said, have been out of the house at the time of the violence and have actually served longer sentences. The last myth that I just want to spend a couple minutes on is this idea that there's this separate defense out there called battered women's defense or battered women's syndrome defense. There is no state in this country that has a separate defense, with the possible exception of Rhode Island, called battered women's defense or battered women's syndrome defense. I also want to be completely clear that I do not advocate for a separate defense called battered women's defense or battered women's syndrome defense. In the vast majority of cases we work on, when a woman kills her partner, the defense is self-defense, which is already on your books and is already on the books of every single state in this country. I think it's important to get that there's not the separate defense because people are very sloppy with language, including attorneys. And language is powerful, as we all know. And one of the things that we really have been struggling with is the fact that many attorneys, defense attorneys and prosecutors and judges, think there is this separate defense called battered women's syndrome defense or battered women's defense, or sort of are a little foggy about it. And so what we find working with the defense attorneys is that what they think they need to do is to prove she's been battered. And if they prove she's been battered, then she gets acquitted. So that basically they're missing an essential ingredient to a successful defense. So if what we're talking about is that a self-defense defense, and you're saying, given this woman's experience with this abuse, that she knew at that time of the incident that she really needed to defend herself, or to use the sort of generic self-defense language, that she was reasonable in her belief that she was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm at that time, that it's important for the jury to understand why she was so fearful then. And what we say is, yeah, of course it's important to bring in that testimony about that history of abuse that she experienced. Let me be clear, and you can underscore this, that if you have two guys in a barroom brawl and there is some history that went on between those two guys, and one guy claims he killed the other in self-defense, even if it's in a barroom, that history of experience of the other guy's violence will come into that courtroom. This is not new, this is not unusual, it is not special. The difference is that for battered women, that information is generally so much more extensive and it covers a much longer period of time. And she knows so much more about his violence than the guy in the bar, that sometimes people see it as different. But to be able to bring in testimony about the history of violence is not new, special, unique, or anything different. Again, it can sometimes be complicated because of the length of that violence and the amount of time over which that violence occurred, but generally speaking, we've been able to get that in when it is asked for and brought in properly. In addition to that, not in lieu of, sometimes in some circumstances for some women, it's actually helpful to have an expert come in and testify on behalf of the woman. And usually the expert, and it varies, and the type of expert you would want and what you would want the expert to say, and whether or not you would want the expert to specifically interview the woman or not, are decisions that the defense team really has to make. But in general, an expert will come in and talk about the experiences and beliefs and perceptions of that woman as a battered woman. Because the reality is what that defense team needs to do is educate the jury to understand the realities of her life and why she was, in fact, reasonable in her belief. Why she acted in self-defense. And I know this is a burden of proof issue, but we don't want to talk about that. I mean, the reality is the defense shouldn't have to prove anything, but as you know well as I, the defense, it is helpful to be able to show the juries that she did, in fact, act in self-defense, even if it's not the legal standard. So what we're seeing is that this is a very complicated set of hurdles for women to get over. If the standard is that she was reasonable in her belief that she was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, you have many hurdles. One of them being, I believe we live in a world that just de facto believes that women are pretty unreasonable. So I think we just have general sexism about reasonableness. But more importantly, of the most unreasonable women in the world are battered women. I mean, how can you be more unreasonable than to stay with a man who beats you up? So you have a very big hurdle there to get over. And I mean, you're not supposed to be showing that she was reasonable or not. Was her belief reasonable? What is the actual language here? Do you know?
We call it justifiable use of force. A person is justified in the use of force when and to the extent that it's necessary to prevent such others' use of force against themselves. So we have the word reasonable, but the prosecutor emphasizes necessary. It wasn't necessary.
It wasn't necessary.
Isn't it imminent danger to women?
Yeah, it has to be imminent.
Which in many circumstances, in some circumstances, can be a problem. So there are many legal hurdles and legal challenges. But I just want to be clear, this idea of an expert coming in and saying she has battered women's syndrome is something that may or may not be something the defense team may choose to use. Because a defense team does not use an expert does not mean, number one, that she's not battered or that the defense attorney is doing a bad idea. In any criminal case, as in any case, you really have to do an individual evaluation. You really have to take a look at what's going on here. And would an expert help your case or not? We don't have time now, but one of the things I would like to flag, and maybe we can talk about later, is to talk about this, the terminology, even battered woman syndrome. I think one of the problems with the term, not actually the definition itself, and even the definition that Lenore Walker gives, is really okay. There's hard language in it that makes it very complicated for battered women, I think, generally, but particularly battered women who are on trial. If you're talking about the term battered woman syndrome, it's a medical model, and it sounds like she's sick. It sounds like she has a disease. It sounds like she's defective. It sounds like there's something wrong with her. She has a syndrome. As a friend of mine says, is it catching? And so I think it's important to note that it's a term of art that is used that does have a downside to it. We are seeing how it is getting turned around and used against women. Women are losing their children in some states because they, quote, have battered woman syndrome. That was not the intention. That was not what this term was designed to do, but to understand that there is some backlash now. And we have to be careful about it.
I don't know how you can.
But,
Be careful.
well, see, the problem, and it's the problem.
I think it really is woman blaming in a real clearly visible way. That you talk about all these personality characteristics of this battered woman, and we even have a handout that says, what the personality characteristics are of battered women. You read that and it is not a view of women that allows them to be reasonable in their own self-defense.
Right.
It's not a reasonable woman who has all these personality characteristics.
Is that being used here, that term? Like, do battered women's advocates do that? It has been. And again, I think...
Never successful.
We had some successful cases in Flathead County years ago.
Oh, years ago.
We had Lenore Walker came to one of our first cases, found it.
She just went to do a case in northern Idaho in one too.
Yeah, but it was years ago, and it was successful. But this backlash thing is something I think is real, especially in Montana. We don't like being told by people come from someplace else what's going on in our community. And the backlash thing, I think your point about the strategical decision by the defense team of what to use, whether to use, and who to use is real important in these cases.
And the
Because
reality...
you can blow it by
Absolutely.
telling people the truth.
No, but I mean, yes, that's true, but you can also blow it if you tell the truth in the wrong way, which is also what
Yeah.
you're saying. You know, and the reality is that I do believe there are all sorts of consequences of violence that are very important for the jury to understand. And so most experts, or many experts, are very important tools on getting that information in. And when I say to be careful about battered woman syndrome, it's a term that a lot of people have moved away from, but still continue to testify about the consequences of violence, and really to try to talk and do the education of the jury, talk to the jury about and educate the jury about the consequences of violence. And some of those are psychological consequences, but there's also a whole host of practical consequences that need to be the jury needs to be educated about. I am not anti-expert, let me be clear. It is very important for the jury to get the information that it needs. The question is, how can the jury get that information most effectively? In many circumstances, the woman herself is a very effective teller of the tale so that the juror really can understand it. In some circumstances, it is very important to have an outside expert come in and help the jury really be able to tie together some of the pieces that may not be so obvious to somebody who doesn't have training in this area. And when I say, I think what you said is really correct, but we also have this tension, and this press here, this is a little complicated. We have this tension, which is we need to be able to get this information into the courtroom. And the court has given us certain hooks to use. In many states now, a lot of people have asked for and gotten an expert on domestic violence, an expert about the consequences of abuse, and have not used that term. In other jurisdictions, it's been more complicated, and the only way to get in that information is by saying that we're having somebody come in and talk about battered woman syndrome, even though what they actually say is the exact same stuff. So it's like, how do you play in their ball court with their rules to be able to get into information? And sometimes the only way in is in using that term. And it's complicated. Like, there's a friend of mine who testifies all the time. She gets qualified as an expert on battered woman syndrome and then does not use that terminology. And it varies. It varies a lot.
Well, in some of the material, a lot of it talks about the instructions, the judge's instructions to the jury that are so crucial. And I guess my question is, how does that work for the defense to try to include the self-defense if in the instructions to the judge or to the battered women's syndrome?
What is the threshold here? I don't know what it is.
I can tell you in Flathead County, we have the Montana Model Criminal Jury Instruction Guide. It's put out by a commission, it was appended by the Supreme Court. We either instruct from that or from the Montana Code or from specific language from a Montana case. Absent one of those three things, any instruction offered would probably be refused by a defense attorney. So unless you as a legislature want to monkey with the self-defense language, and that's risky.
Yeah, no, it seems like it's going to be.
You're not going to get a
still
judge to
strong.
instruct a jury. The other component that I hope at some point we discuss is not just the trial, because we're focusing on this educating the juries, but also sentencing. What do you do after they're convicted? Whether they plead or are convicted at trial, and how do you influence the judge and give him or her options other than prison, because judges are trained that if someone commits a murder, they go to prison.
All right. And before we get to that, I know we have like 2 minutes, but I just want to end by saying that given the fact that there's so much misinformation out there and people want to help and lots of people are moving ahead with some of the correct information and a lot of the wrong information, that we have to be diligent in our efforts to do this work well. We have to be diligent in our efforts to find out what is truly going on in your own state here, what is going on with the specifics of any given case. And we have to be just completely diligent in all the work we do anyway. But when you're talking about a woman who is charged with a crime, who is facing a huge amount of prison time, we have to really remember how important it is that we do this work well. The reality is most of you aren't going to be working with women who are charged with killing their abusers. I know that. It's not something that happens here very often, thank God. But I do think it's also important to you, for you, and for each of us, every time we institute a new program, a new policy, a new piece of legislation, or whatever, that every time we ask a set of questions about evaluating this program or policy or legislative initiative is to say the usual questions that we should be asking. Will this increase safety for women? Will this increase options? How will this be used against women? Will this be used more adversely in certain communities of color, etc.? Those types of questions that I think people should be using to do evaluation of programs and initiatives. I would just ask you to always ask yourselves, how will this get used against women who are charged with crimes? That should be one of those questions that you get ticked off in your head every time you evaluate something. Because the reality is, the vast majority of our work in the criminal justice arena is establishing pro-arrest and pro-prosecution policies. And so we have to look at what happens when this policy that we establish, that we're working to pass, is used against a woman who is charged with a crime, and it will be. And in my experience, sometimes it is used much more vigorously and dramatically and with more effort than it is ever used against any man that it was designed to, quote, get. So we have to be very careful on looking at how our policies are going to impact women charged with crimes. Very careful. So I just ask, if you leave with nothing else, to say, this is complicated, there's a huge amount of information in here that we need to continue to learn about. The information changes as our times change and as our laws change. But last is always to remember that you may, even if you've never dealt with a woman who is charged with a crime, you may deal with a woman who's charged with a crime. And part of the reason you may not be dealing with women who are charged with crimes is because that we have not created services that are friendly to women who are charged with crimes yet. And so that's another question in terms of outreach down the road.